Hi, this is Paul. Didn't have time for a long video today. Just had other things I had to do for my day job. So another little short. A Twitter friend pointed me to the Russel Brand, Sam Harris interview, which I thought was incredibly helpful. Dave Rubin tends to be a very accommodating interviewer. He doesn't tend to push real hard. He's very gentle, and there's something to be said for that kind of interview. Russel Brand is Russel Brand, and he does his own thing, and he gets in there and he says what he wants, and he's fun to listen to. And he pushed Sam Harris quite a bit more in terms of a number of things, and so I think that episode between them was really quite terrific. And I've listened to it twice now. I'm going to listen to it a third time. I'll probably be taking elements from that and elements from the Dave Rubin interview of Sam Harris too when I finally am able to construct the longer video. One of the things that I was pondering on last night too was the relationship between Sam Harris and Epicurus. Sam Harris is always looking for some non-Christian roots, and a commenter made the point that, why stop at Christianity? Why go before? And how can we connect some of these individuals to Christianity, and is that fair? That's a fair question, and I think a valid conversation. And so if you're looking for a pagan philosopher long before Christianity, you could look at Epicurus, and there's a fun little video on School of Life about Epicurus that you can watch. It's only about 5 minutes, and it's worth watching, and it'll probably give you some real things to think about in terms of Sam Harris and what he stands for. Now, one of the things that comes up quite a bit in both Sam Harris's interviews is that he often says that consciousness is the only thing that matters, and that makes sense. And so one of the things I'm looking at in the video, the longer video I'm making, often when I make a video, I sit down for maybe an hour or two, and I hammer out the PowerPoint, which kind of gives me the structure of the argument, and then I sit down and I record the video. That's what I usually do. I'm about my fourth draft of my PowerPoint on this longer Sam Harris, Jordan Peterson religion piece. Each time I get a little ways into it, and then I don't have time to actually record the video because of other things just in my life. So then I think about it more, and then I rework it. And I don't have the final draft of that PowerPoint yet. I might be able to do it tomorrow. It looks like I'll have a little bit of time probably tomorrow. So I'm still working on that. But Sam Harris, so if you look at the Jordan Peterson, Susan Blackmore unbelievable interview, Blackmore keeps saying Sam Harris is all about consciousness and taking consciousness seriously. And seeing this, I can very much see the point that she was making. Sam Harris is all about consciousness, but I think his approach to consciousness and the way he approaches consciousness as a materialist is very interesting. I'm talking fast because I want to keep this video short. It's very interesting because, for example, when he appeals to, let's say, Buddhism and certain forms of Hinduism, and says, well, that's kind of like this. I think, no, that's not at all like this, because when you approach this as a materialist, you approach this in a very different way than, let's say, an ancient Buddhist or an ancient Hindu, or even a contemporary Buddhist and a contemporary Hindu, for whom the universe is, well, we'll have to get into that, because this gets into all of these ways in which multiple layers of the universe are or are not connected, and the hierarchies, in a sense, we have them in, which are foundational and which are expressions of them, so on and so forth. Again, I got to be careful, this is going to get long. I'm just going to play this little portion of their conversation because I think it's illuminating in terms of whether Sam Harris can actually pull this off. So let's jump into a little bit of this interview.
But if you look at the history of Christianity and Judaism and Islam, you find people who, I mean, these are explicitly dualistic traditions. You have a soul that exists in relationship to the divine, and sure. that division is maintained theologically.
I would say, Sam Harris, that the reason that bifurcation occurred is precisely because were man's relationship with the divine prioritized in the manner that you've just been describing, that seems neurologically appetite, were that to become our priority, a materialistic, let's call it, lifestyle, a mechanistic social system such as the ones that we inhabit would be less fertile, because if people believed that the ultimate reality was not being experienced by the self, that there was no self, that unbinds us. That makes oneness a real possibility. That starts to suggest that your consciousness and my consciousness ultimately are the same, or at least there's nothing to suggest that they're any different, and that the things that we believe to be different are superficial accents acquired through culture.
Now, that's very much Russel Brand's idea, and this is obviously a place that Russel Brand and Sam Harris are going to disagree on pretty dramatically, but it's right here in these questions of materiality, consciousness, so on and so forth. Russel Brand seems to be promoting much more of a New Age type of thing. I think I would love to sit down with these two, and every time someone said spirituality, just stop them and say, okay, what do you mean by that word? Really, let's talk about that, because even in my own Christian ministry, when I hear people say spiritual, I want to stop them and say, we have to talk about that word before we can go any further, because this word is basically acting like that thin layer of water on ice that lets the skate go above it. And we're not all on the same page about what that word means. Anyway, now Sam Harris's argument response, which is very interesting.
But that's also true materially, and we shouldn't give the material short shrift, because the material progress is the thing that frees attention to. Just you roll back the clock long enough, you find people living in just perpetual states of trying not to die, right? You're fending off.
Funny to us.
You're exposed to the elements. You're suffering the consequences of disease, and you have no concept of what disease is, right? You don't know about the germ theory of disease, and your child dies, and you think it's because your neighbor shined the evil eye on the child, right? So it's like you have magical beliefs accounting for changes in the world, and they're completely fallacious, right? So the progress we've made in understanding the material world is all to the good, except we have all of these misaligned incentive problems and externalized damages to very good things. Like you want an iPhone, right? But you don't want people jumping off the roof of Foxconn because life is so painful there to make an iPhone, right? So is it possible to make an iPhone without creating just unendurable misery for some number of people? Undoubtedly, it must be true, right? We haven't figured it out yet, so as to make that the default, and we need to do that. But there is no distance between the material and the spiritual here. Because if consciousness is just,
what do you mean by spiritual?
Just a matter of information processing in the right complex systems. And if consciousness could one day be born in our computers, right? Well, then we'll have an ethical obligation to not make our computers suffer, right? If Siri could suffer, right? Well, then it matters how you talk to her, and it would matter every.
I've only used her for stupid questions. Mine's a bloke, actually. Why complicate life?
And we're obviously not there yet, or it certainly seems obvious that we're not there yet. But at a certain point, we will very likely either be in the presence of conscious machines or think we are, right? We'll lose sight of, they'll emulate conscious systems in a compelling enough way that our default will be, I'm in relationship to this thing now. And to withdraw a sense of consciousness in that case would seem just unprincipled and unethical. We could well build machines that seem to have emotional lives and even have more richer emotional lives than we do, because they're going to have access to all of human knowledge, all of the aesthetic products of human ingenuity for all of history, and they'll be able to talk about them and appreciate them and remind you of how much you love certain things and react to your emotion faster and more accurately than your best friends or your spouse, right? We could ultimately we will very likely build these machines, and if we haven't understood how consciousness arises in physical systems, we'll think they're conscious, and we'll maybe right or wrong about that. And whether we're right or wrong about that will be of huge consequence, because
huge moral consequence.
It would be an absolutely abhorrent act to build conscious systems that can suffer in ways we don't even understand.
Yes.
And just to cavalierly, spawn this off in simulations and, on the Amazon cloud and not know what the hell we're doing.
For me, though, of course, we've already created, that this is not just a hypothesis, because already all around us, as we've already fleetingly discussed, lie scattered the damaged and broken and presumably conscious entities that are our fellow human beings,
human beings, farm animals, dogs, and we're going to get into. Sam Harris doesn't like the word religion, and so I'm going to use philosophy of life in my big video, because we won't talk about religion, talk philosophy of life. Are those words you can object to? Are those words that we can take the ideas of the Christian and the ideas of the Muslim and the ideas of the Jew and the ideas of the Buddhist and the ideas of the Hindu and the ideas of the atheist and the ideas of the New Age people, and all of those, can we all say they have a philosophy of life if we're going to segregate religion over to the side? Okay, is that one way we're going to get beyond the problem of the religious talk? But now what happens in Sam Harris is that this consciousness and the happiness or suffering that happens in this consciousness now becomes the criteria by which the entire moral system is evaluated. Now, I would argue that Sam Harris is basically explaining and articulating the philosophy of life of what Robert Bellah called expressive individualism, Sheilaism, if you will. I've got Habits of the Heart right up there on the bookshelf. Habits of the Heart, a book that was quite popular in the 80s. My whole show is bringing back books that I read in college in the 80s. Where is amusing ourselves to death? Anyway, I got to keep this short. I don't want to ramble too much. I don't even have that much time. So here's a question. If a child suffers in the forest and nobody sees her, did she suffer? Can you answer that question? Because Harris begins by saying, well, this whole business about having a relationship with this man in the sky or something like this, that's all just woo-woo, or that's nothing. But what really matters is consciousness. And now he's talking about consciousness and machines. And that leads me to ask the question, okay, well, let's say I do this. Here is despair. Is my computer suffering? Is the Jiffy, Giphy, oh, I said it, oh my goodness, where's that going to go? In the comment section. Is the computer suffering? Are these people suffering? Are the actors suffering? Are we suffering and not knowing it? And a lot of people have been bringing up Kierkegaard and the existentialists in this. What does it mean for a computer to suffer? What about despair? Reread Kierkegaard's Sickness Unto Death, which is all about despair. So am I making the computer suffer? And by closing this page, well, actually they're all GIFs, so okay, so maybe the server isn't suffering anymore, but maybe the code that is running in my browser is suffering. Look at the suffering that I'm doing. Well, I'm going to do more. Am I committing a moral injustice? Here we go. Crying. There she is. Too sad to work, too sad to walk. Is my computer suffering? How would I know? What is suffering? Now this gets, how do I know if it's suffering? In a sense, we're kind of back to, if you look at Peterson and Delahunty and his relationship with his lawnmower. And Peterson jokes at him like, we could really talk about this more. And Peterson was not unserious when he made that comment to Delahunty in their conversations. And so then now, in many ways, we're back to Sheldrake. Watch Rupert Sheldrake and Russel Brand's conversation. And I know a lot of people are like, well, Sheldrake, he's just... But the questions he's raising, does the sun suffer? The sun has more biochemical connections than your brain does. Well, how would we know if the sun is suffering? Well, how do we know if we talk about plant suffering, and many of us would say, well, plants do seem to suffer because they do seem to thrive. Well, what about gems? And what about, this gets woo-woo very, very quickly. And in a sense, we're back to the monarchy. The materialist perspective requires an imagination of the monarchical vision, this objective order that we can imagine, usually by taking out the fourth dimension, which is time, but then viewing it through eyes that no individual has, because all of us are viewing it subjectively. So in a sense, we do so in our imagination, and our imagination creates this subjective, this objective order. And so if I imagine this tree falling in the forest, well, I imagine a tree falling in the forest without sound. I can picture it in my mind in a sense easier than I can hear it in my mind. So where does all of this go? And does then the universe of potentially happy or suffering consciousnesses require a monarchical vision of pathos? Is there not only, what you can see very quickly is this gets relational fast. Now, so Sam Harris is a materialist, and he's reducing all of this to matter and energy. And so consciousness is a product of matter and energy. So do atoms feel? And actually earlier in this thing he said, we don't know if cells feel. We don't know if cells suffer. We might very well make an argument that they suffer, or are we projecting upon them? But given a naturalist materialist perspective, does concern for conscious suffering really make any more sense than a romantic projection of suffering on a felled tree, a picked apple, a cut stone? Isn't it all just rearrangement of matter and energy? In other words, does my chair suffer when I push it across the room? Is the air suffering as this fan is blowing on me in the hot Sacramento summer? Who cares? Does it matter? Well, suddenly, if there is in fact a monarchical observer, well, who can actually have the wisdom and perspective to adjudicate suffering, because very quickly the limousine liberal comes and says to the city who wants to build a homeless camp in their ritzy neighborhood or demand that there be affordable housing there, it pains me to see those poor people. I would rather have them shielded off in a different neighborhood. Okay, you're pained by seeing them. They're pained by who knows what. Well, let's give them computer games and dust them up with Cheetos and give them cocaine until they die. It in a sense makes more sense to give them cocaine until they die rather than making them live through this whole thing. So we're going to have to ask about, well, suffering and how does suffering relate to normal life and accomplishment? Maybe we should stop the Olympics and call the marathon a terrible suffering ordeal. Because, those marathoners, look at the look on their face, they're suffering. Or maybe we should ban childbirth without medicines that kill the pain. This after this whole movement of natural childbirth. This thing doesn't end, in a sense, if you enter into this perspective of making suffering, and Peterson does this to a certain degree, making suffering the central coin of the drama of the universe. That has to be thought through as much as all of the other competitors for central coinage of the universe. So there's a short video. We're looking at 18 minutes. And again, I do a short video because I don't have time for a long one today, and my long one isn't ready, and I know some of you like short videos, so here it is.